What's up, everybody? This is Jason, my good old pal Chris, and this is Unchained Cinema. And we have brought to you today a very interesting movie, I believe. This is called The Experiment from 2010. And the short of it is about a behavioral experiment, if you will. A group of people, Adrian Brody, Forrest Whitaker, Clifton Collins, among other actors in this, all subject themselves to this behavioral experiment of a prison system, and they're broken up in guards and prisoners. And everybody has their own reasons for going, and they kind of show you the two main guys, the Forrest Whitaker character and the Adrian Brody character, kind of why they're doing it. But really what it boils down to, everyone's doing it for money. It's $1,000 a day for 14 days. So that's pretty good money for people who are out on their luck. And so they kind of have this like love story forming with the Adrian Brody character, who his name's Travis in the movie. And they try to set you up and let you, and I want Chris to jump in here in a few minutes, but they try to establish Travis, Adrian Brody character, as this like peace-loving hippie, protester, out on the streets of the Washington D.C. or somewhere, protesting a random, just generic war that's happening somewhere in America or against some country. And there was a skirmish on the steps somewhere between him and a American military guy, because he's like in fatigues and they're getting in a little altercation, and he doesn't swing. That's the big thing they want you to take away from this, that he is this peace-loving, tree-hugging, hippie kind of character. And, even though he was so angry and mad about what was getting ready to transpire, he didn't swing. He didn't use violence. The Forrest Whitaker character is basically lives with his mother, and his mother runs him down every time she gets a chance. So he's like this, kind of this, weak mentally man who's like, you can tell like he's boiling over a bit, like he's getting ready to explode, but he is being pushed down by his mother with her thumb, keeping him down, like ridiculing him, belittling him. She calls him a chicken shit all the time and all this kind of stuff. So you kind of get this dynamic. They try to prepare you for what you're getting ready to see. So so that's essentially what it is. So they all go to this facility out in the middle of nowhere. It looks like it's Indiana. It's like cornfields, and there's just this big prison that's just kind of sitting out there. So that kind of sets this up for what you're getting ready to get into, with the mindset of the two main actors and like where they're coming from, and that is going to be this experiment. And so with that being said, I'm going to throw it over to you, Chris, and kind of get your general thoughts about the first, let's say 20, 30 minutes of the movie, to kind of establish, where we're heading.
Okay, so the opening scene, right? It's very Darwinistic.
Yes.
You have all the animals fighting each other, and it sets the context for the rest of the movie to come, which is essentially human beings resorting to those primordial tendencies. And it's trample the weak, hurdle the dead. And you sent me the trailer to this before we watched it, and I watched the trailer, and within probably 30 seconds of the trailer, I said, this is the Stanford prison experiment. Like, there was no doubt that there was parallels. But I think this is like a take on that whole process. The fact that it ended after 6 days, the Stanford prison experiment ended after 6 days. What I will say is that in the Stanford prison experiment, which differs from the movie, is that I watched an interview, and I'm gonna put a card up here. to a documentary that I watched, and it's interviews with the actual guard that was the most hated character in that Stanford prison experiment. It wasn't nature taking its course. He was coerced by um, the professors that were putting this all on. They wanted to have these guards have a certain persona. They're like you. They have to fear you essentially. So that's where I had a hard. Once I knew that, that's where I had a hard time with this movie because you know having these people go from 0 to 100 without any sort of coaxing or anything, I find it hard to believe because the guard prisoner experience is very parallel to military experience because you have, the prisoners, which you could put as the privates, and the guards, which are the non-commissioned officers. And it just doesn't have that same dynamic, but they're very parallel. And I've met people like the Forrest Whitaker character. They're people that weren't shit in life, and they got promoted, and now they're a non-commissioned officer, and they have this semblance of power, and they use it to the extreme, and they become the worst people you can ever imagine. So that dynamic does exist, just not to that capacity. And I understand that this is a movie, and they're going for a certain thing. But the other side of that is I've known soldiers that come in the army, and they're kind of soft spoken, wimpy, fucking nerdy guys. And people, they fuck with these people and not necessarily make their life miserable, but they push and they prod and they push and they prod. And this person who was just kind of there is now forced into this other atmosphere, and they become real assholes. Like, not monstrous, but kind of, sort of. And it's that continually encouraging them to go in this direction that they normally wouldn't go, and they become way over the top. I've seen that more than once. And, me coming from a military background, that's one of those things that I recognized early. And I worked to kind of work against, if you will, because I saw that dynamic, and I was like, you have this guy that he comes into your unit. He's kind of shy, kind of soft spoken. That's going to be a target for these other people that kind of go after and push them to kind of be that asshole character.
Right. I think we all have those. I'm sure we all have seen that kind of stuff. Obviously, like you said, to different severity or degrees. Excuse me. There's a friend of mine, I guess you could say, when I was in high school. His name is Larry Van Diver. He was always a really tall kid. He kind of looked like Lurch from the Addams Family, but he was super quiet. Like, people used to think he was probably just slow. You know what I'm saying? Like that. People just thought he had some learning disability or whatever. I became friends with him because we lived in the same neighborhood. But to your point, every day people would pick on this kid. They just, like you said, they never like put their hands on him. They just poke and prod, say little things, just try to get under the skin of this guy. Right?
Try to get him out of their shell.
Right. They see weakness or perceived weakness, and then people latch on for the attack. And when this kid, I mean, I guess we're probably 10th grade at the time, I would say, in high school, and they just kept picking and picking, like you said. And one thing they didn't know that I knew, that this kid that they were like making fun of was already at that time a like 1st degree or 2nd degree black belt in some sort of martial arts. And he never acted tough. He never acted like he's a badass, nothing like that. And then one day, this group of kids at school, and I went to a pretty big high school with lots of diversity and all that. They started picking on Larry, and Larry ended up whipping all their asses in martial arts. I mean, like something you'd see out of like the Cobra Kai TV show right now, except it was real life. We're talking about roundhouse kicks. We're talking about throws. We're talking about jumping through the air, kicking people in the face. It was like unbelievable. And I remember sitting there watching that unfold and going, I'm not surprised he finally had enough. You know, so you sometimes, you know, not every situation is going to be like a clip from a martial arts movie. I get that. You know, it just happened to be that guy that day, you know, had that skill set. But, you know, certain people, the people you least expect, sometimes will finally have enough because of your perceived weakness. And this movie, to get it back to the movie, was kind of like that, you know. The Travis character is like he's getting, you know, pushed and pushed and pushed. It's like these little microaggressions or you know, that are being done to them. And I think that the Forrest Whitaker character named Michael, and you know, Michael and him start out as buddies. When they're like going to their interview, you know, they're kind of like connecting. They think they're both kind of like quasi intellectuals. Like they're kind of like, oh, we're above these other guys here. Look around. These guys are just a bunch of meatheads. So they're kind of like laughing and like palling around a bit. And then slowly but surely the wheels fall off and you realize, you know, what's boiling under the surface for both of them have, like you said, there's two different mindsets. One is becoming the authority and like getting off on that. The other one is finally being like the kind of meek and mild, you know, just like get along to get along, is becoming more and more the aggressor because he's like, if I don't do this, you know, if I don't decide to fight back, then we're going to be ramrodded and, you know, we're going to like lose our, you know, humanity or whatever you want to call it. So he's fighting up against that, so to speak. So it was a very interesting dynamic, and kind of what I just want to hit on also what you said at the very beginning of the movie. It shows like animals attacking and each other. It has this foreboding, like creepy music throughout the first 3 minutes. And it really sets up this like foreboding fear of what you're getting ready to see, of just like attacks and like decimations. It's also showing people attacking the other people. It's showing like people being killed. And they're just taking clips of all kinds of stuff and put it in there. And that also is letting you know later on in the movie, they also show that type of stuff to the prisoners so they can see, to kind of get their reaction to it. So they're like, they put them in this like, you know, secluded like little like box and then feed that information to them like through the TV or whatever. And it's a very interesting thing to see this as it unfolds. I also want to make a mention real quick that this is also off of a novel called Black Box. So if you're interested in seeing what this movie's based off of, it's called Black Box. So I don't know anything about it. I just saw it in their credits. So I just thought I'd let people know, if you do want to follow this, that's what you'd want to go see. So I think that's kind of a little bit about the introduction, a little bit about the characters, a little bit about what we're getting ready to see of the film. Also, I just want to make a mention that Fisher Stevens is also in this. He plays the doctor. He has a very small role, but if you all know who Fisher Stevens is, he's in the movie Hackers. He's also in Short Circuit, which is a great 80s movie as well. And he's in a couple other things throughout, you know, TV shows and movies and stuff like that. But Fisher Stevens plays the doctor in this. So that kind of gets you to where we're at, and that's where we end up. So the other thing I want to mention to you, Chris, is that something I thought about was the $1,000 a day behavior experiment, right? They simulate the penitentiary, putting people in prison as prison guards and as prisoners. You know, I know people do things for money. People do, like, they'll sell blood or sell sperm and all this kind of stuff, or they'll do some like psychological experiments on like college campuses. But I know this is a real thing they did. Do you know, or have you heard, is this a thing they continue to do, or is this like a one-off thing? Because I didn't know much about this. I thought, because it was so extreme, and I know some of this is Hollywood, of course, but like, do they put people in these like quote unquote experiments that are like, you know, supposedly safety, it's a safe environment, or that's just, that was all Hollywood, and that was a one-time thing off of this, and it never happened again. Do you know anything about that?
That's not anything that I can speak with any sort of authority on.
Uh-huh.
You know, we're always trying to push the envelope and advance psychology and science. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was. But what I would like to bring to the table is the other thing that this brought to mind. And I've never read this book. I heard about it through a Jordan Peterson podcast, but the book Ordinary Men.
There's a book called Ordinary Men that's a lot like that. I don't think I've mentioned that to you before, but Ordinary Men is a book about, it's the best book of its type. Maybe it's the only book of its type. It's possible, but it's plotted much like Breaking Bad in some sense. It's a story about these German policemen in early stages of World War II. And they were guys who were old enough to be raised in Germany really before the Hitlerian propaganda came out in full force. You know, if you were a teenager, say in the 1930s, you were going to be pulled right into the propaganda machine, and maybe you were part of the Hitler Youth, and like you were raised in that, you know. But if you were older, then you were raised before that, and you're not as amenable to propaganda once you're older than about, well, I would say about 22 or something like that. It's pretty young, actually. If you're going to make a soldier, you have to get a soldier young, because once people are in their early 20s, say, they already have their personality developed. Anyways, these policemen were sent into Poland after the Germans marched through. And, you know, it was wartime, and there was this hypothesis in Germany that the Jews in particular were operating as a fifth column and undermining the German war effort, because, of course, the Germans blamed the Jews and a variety of other people for actually setting up the conditions that made the war necessary. And so when the police were sent into Poland, they were also required to make peace, roughly speaking. And so they started out by rounding up all the Jewish men between 18 and 65 and gathering them in stadiums and then shipping them off on the trains. But that isn't where they ended. They ended in a very, very dark place. I mean, these guys were going out in the field with naked pregnant women and shooting them in the back of the head by the end of their training. And what's really interesting about that is that their commander told them that they could go home at any time. So this is not one of those examples of people following orders. And the reason they didn't, roughly speaking, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons they didn't is because they didn't think it was comradely, so to speak, to leave the guys they were working with to do all the dirty work and run off. You know, and that's really an interesting fact, you know, because in different circumstances, you wouldn't think about that as reprehensible, right? You'd think, well, that's part of teamwork and under rough circumstances, and that's at least in part how they viewed it. And they were also made physically ill multiple times, physically and psychologically ill by the things that they had to do, but they kept doing them anyways. So it's one step at a time, and that's the thing, is that you end up in very bad places one step at a time, so you've got to watch those steps.
Reserve Police Battalion 101 and the Final Solution in Poland. And it's how you slowly manipulate people to do something that is completely outside the realm of normalcy. You know, everyone thinks that, you know, the Holocaust, right? Like, oh, I'd be on the side of justice and I'd be on the side of the good guys. But you can't really say that, because a lot of those people were normal, ordinary people. So how do you get from being a, you know, Joe the Haberdasher to being, you know, the angel of death? And from what I remember from that podcast is they took these people and they slowly desensitized them. And it's like, okay, you're going to kill this man for whatever reason. And then it transcended and transcended and transcended to the point where you were willing to kill anybody for any reason, just because you've been slowly desensitized and broken away from reality. So yeah, it's easy to say that, you know, I'd be the hero in this story, but history tells you different things. And as a history major, I've learned that time after time after time after time. These people are bred to be a certain way through certain circumstances. And you can tell yourself that you're going to be the hero of the day every time, but until you're in that position, in those exact circumstances, you can't really say one way or the other that you would do A or B.
Yeah, I completely agree. Kind of using that same thought as the same thing about Anne Frank. It's like people putting themselves on the line to protect her and her family, right? You know, they're hiding them, and that's not just her story. That was tons of people's stories. And it's easy, like you said, if you're by you're like a single man, or you're on your own and you're wanting to try to save somebody, Anne Frank or whoever, right? You're putting yourself on the line. You might be willing to do that, but would you be willing to put your family on the line? Would you be willing to put your parents on the line to protect somebody else, knowing that if you get busted, now not only are you going to die, but your whole family's going to die for your decision? Is it the right decision to protect someone else, save someone? Of course, but then you also, it's a lot deeper, like you said, than just going, what are you going to do given the circumstances? Are you going to put your children's lives at risk? And sometimes these people make the decision that my family's lives are more important than these other people's lives. So they make that decision to carry out these, horrible and horrendous activities and these things. I totally understand. It's so much easier to do that. It's like the idea when people, I'm sure, as a lot of us Americans will understand, is the whole thing with 9/11, right? Like, if I was on that airplane, I would have jumped up and I would have whooped this guy's butt and blah, 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 and killed him. It's like, but then you got to think, you're going to lose your life. The plane might go down. Your family might be killed. It's like, it's totally different when you're faced with a real situation like that. You would like to think that you would just jump up and just like be Rambo, but the reality of it is it's totally different, So, there's all these situations, like how you're going to react in a real situation compared to watching a movie and thinking, oh, I can do that. That's the same thing as like watching, Over the Top with Sylvester Stallone with this. It's like, it's one thing to be like, oh, I can arm wrestle this guy. You walk away like, I'm going to arm wrestle all my friends. That because you get all pumped and psyched up, that's different than like actually putting your life or your family's life on the line in a real situation. So I think we have to be very careful. Like you said, how you really going to react. There's a lot more to it than just like your initial feeling of doing what's the right thing, which we all would probably want to do.
Well, I would also add to that, and I had a discussion. I went to the range the last couple of weeks, and the NCOIC is a sergeant first class, so he's a senior NCO, but he is a Chinese American. He was born in China, brought up in the United States, and he has concerns over where people's loyalties lie. And it's like, how well do you know someone? And what he sees in the Chinese community is that some of these people, even though they may be American soldiers with Chinese heritage, their allegiance is to China. And the mental things that go on are so vast and broad. It's hard to see where someone's mindset is.
I mean, that goes back to what, unfortunately, I mean, we don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but that goes back to the whole thing with World War II and internment camps in America with the Japanese. We didn't do that to the Germans. We didn't do that to the Italian Americans.
Yes, we did.
But not to the level that we did to the Japanese.
Granted.
I mean,
granted.
So, the thing about it is that, the reason why that was the case is twofold, in my opinion. Is one, they looked different. And two, they were the smaller group of people. There was Germans and Italians everywhere, but the Japanese were a much smaller group of people that was easier to identify and to take away their rights, essentially.
And they were the aggressors in that. And I have to add that they were the aggressors, correct. And they're the reason, they were the catalyst for why we got involved in all that. So not to say it's right, wrong, or indifferent, but that's just kind of the reality. They were the aggressors.
But it goes back to that mindset of your buddy you're talking about, or your fellow soldier. Of a lot of people, especially back then, was like, well, can we trust their allegiance? And of course, that should not ever be a thing that we really should think about, because unless somebody gives you a reason to not trust them, you should not default to go, well, they're untrustworthy because of the way they look. That should never be the default measure of that. It should be by their actions, not their inaction, that puts them in a situation where they're having to defend themselves. And I think we find ourselves in that situation kind of today in general, by the world we live in some respects. But with all that being said, I do want to kind of mention that what your thought about this. I brought this up at the beginning of the talk, but I want to get your thoughts. So they really framed the Adrian Brody character as this like long-haired, liberal-loving, following his heart. There's a couple scenes where he's like touching his heart and like his like fake tattoos on his beads on his chest, where he's like trying to get like power and come to like his inner self and kind of bring himself down and all this stuff. And he's this good and righteous man. There's even a scene where he's like finds a cockroach and he picks up the cockroach and he puts it safely back on the ground, and instead of what most people would do, would smash a disease-ridden, sickly cockroach and and all that. They really wanted to push the narrative, in my opinion, that the Adrian Brody character Michael was this he's just following his heart and doing the right thing. And I want to talk more about that later as the movie goes on. But what was your initial thoughts with that? Because I felt like they really were trying to bring home that point.
I thought the anti-war protest was kind of an odd transition.
Yeah.
But you had the vet that attacked the girl, and then that's who Adrian Brody gets in conflict with.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Most vets are more well-adjusted than that. I've never seen that. Not to say that it can't happen, but thought that was all odd and was kind of for Hollywood. But I think Adrian Brody's character is more complex than he seems on the surface, because he has the talk where he talks about the Red Dawn. He's like, oh, that was my favorite movie growing up.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to tell based on the context of the movie where he was coming from. And does everybody agree with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan? No. I don't think that he was necessarily the hippy dippy dumb shit that you kind of take him to be. I think it's a little more complex than that.
Sure. Well, my thing is the way they, again, this is an hour and a half long movie, so they can't get too down. They can't get too deep into the woods with a lot of stuff. I get all that, but the one thing I took away from it was they were painting him in this certain light, because then when you look at Michael, the Forrest Whitaker character, they make him off to be this like Christian. They have all this Christian crosses and Jesus at his house. They have him coming off as like this authoritative person who's being oppressed by his mother, but it's like boiling under the surface. It looks like he has they have a scene where they talked about how there's a clear right and wrong, and he's like agrees to that, like there is a clear right and wrong, where Adrian Brody's character Michael's kind of like, hey man, it's all just kind of okay, like what works for you is different than what works for me. And and then when they're bringing up to that same question to the Michael character, he's like, no, there is good, there is evil. They want you to establish that, like, again, how I'm walking away from it was they want you to paint one person as a conservative Christian type, a repressed person, and that's more susceptible to want to be authoritative and like power, to another guy who's kind of like, hey man, let's all free love and hug trees and all that. So I don't think that was an accident by doing those two, like those scenes where they try to do that, but because it sets up later on the movie. But it's very much, I think, a way to establish two different characters and two different mindsets and maybe two different like ways of life.
It shows that just because you're on one side, you can't cross over to the other.
Sure.
And you said Adrian Brody's character, he's the hippy dippy guy, and He's like, love and peace and blah, blah, blah. By the end of this thing, he's the aggressor, and where Forrest Whitaker's character is he's the guy that just is he's down in society, down on his luck, treated like crap. And when he's provided a little bit of authority, he flips the script and now he's the aggressor, and it puts him at odds with the other guy who's kind of the free to be me, and it makes that guy turn into the aggressor towards the oppressor. So
Yes.
I thought that was a good dynamic. I thought they did that very well, and it's very consistent with what you saw in the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%, because even before you watch the movie, that the Adrian Brody character more than likely will end up kind of going against his moral code, because they talk about, and they again, another way to separate the two guys and the mindsets is they talk about religion and God, and the Michael character, the Forrest Whitaker character, Michael, he's like, yeah, of course I'm a Christian, like, yes, I believe. And they ask that same question to Adrian Brody, he's just like, no. And then he goes, what do you mean? That's not really a yes or no question. He just goes, no. Like he doesn't even acknowledge the fact. So the fact that they're setting them up for that kind of outcome and fall down of mindsets or whatever is definitely heading that direction by the end of the movie. Because even people, and this is a theme which the very beginning scenes show you this, when people push to the extreme and to the breaking point, even the people who hold on to these values and morals of like being peace loving and not fighting back and not engaging in violence or whatever will eventually be pushed to the point where that is exactly what they'll end up doing, either because they cannot keep it in anymore because they see an injustice or a perceived injustice, or because of self-preservation. The thing I thought was interesting was that they also picked, there's a bunch of guys that they interviewed leading up to the breaking up of guards and prisoners. And you get the vibe of like a lot of the guys they picked to be guards are like ex-military guys, like meathead type guys that are like, want to be party animals, because there's a couple scenes where they're like having like sex with women and like partying hard, and like they're kind of like punk rock attitude. Like one guy has like like painted nails, and he's kind of like this punk rock dude. He's kind of like tough guy and all this stuff. And those are the guys they picked to be the guards, because I think again, kind of goes back to what your point was that they were thinking that these guys will default to be more aggressors, so they will want them to be guards to kind of push the prisoners' buttons. Whereas if it was the roles were reversed, it'd be a lot more relaxed and hey, let's just get through this 14-day experiment easily. Everybody's love get along kind of thing. So they picked the guys that are way more high strung, way more authoritative kind of stuff to be the guards, to kind of push those roles a little bit more extreme, which I think makes sense because they were like right there, they're already primed, ready to go.
I will say that with the mantra that they showed with Adrian Brody, basically being Clockwork Oranged.
Yes.
I would have totally been a guard. 100%. But I just thought it was unrealistic that within 6 days with no outside interference that you would go from 0 to 100, because all these people had money on the mind. That was the ultimate goal, was money. And that's what made this movie unrealistic to me, because are we making a show or are we trying to get paid? And if you're making a show, then yeah, you up the ante and be a jerk to all these people, and you end up being the Forrest Whitaker character. But in reality, from both perspectives, if the ultimate goal is money, which it seems to be, because that seemed to be what it was on everybody's mind, it's like, okay, if I'm a prisoner, then I'm just going to go about my merry way doing whatever. And if I'm a guard, I'm going to go about my merry way. And if somebody gets out of line, you do minor corrections to get people back in order so that things don't get out of control. So, and with the way they screen these people, and it seemed like the only one they missed and all that in terms of, being a prisoner who was a prisoner already was Mr. Nix, which was prisoner 17, the neo-Nazi.
Yeah.
He seemed to be the only one that was, a prior felon and was, could fulfill that prisoner role because he's been in that situation before. But I don't see people resorting to those extremes for no reason. And the movie really gave no reason outside of maybe the alcohol induction. When they pissed all over Adrian Brody's character.
Yeah.
But it was already so far beyond the realm of normalcy by the time it got to that point that in reality it would have never got there to begin with.
I agree. There's a part of me, I agree with you, but I did write down the part where Michael finally gets his first taste of real power after the like you said, after the pissing all over Michael, or pissing all over Travis thing. There's a scene where he goes into like a bathroom and it shows him like getting hard. And like he just has this like there's like the lights go off and like it shows him like getting like this power in his mind, like his like there's a switch that's created that like turns on.
Right.
And that's what, and I think a lot of people at that point who've been ridiculed and kept down for, their whole life, and they get a taste of that. Like you were saying about it in your own experience, you've seen people, as soon as they get a little bit of a taste of authority or a power, it goes to their head. And they want to see how far they can push it, within the realms of, I guess the parameters of what can be done. And I think that, you have that. And I do agree with you. There's quite a few of the scenes that leads to the point where the breaking point, it's just kind of like silly, but again, they have to do something because they can't put their hands on them, that, which we didn't really establish that at the beginning. We should have said, the thing is no violence that can happen, and they automatically do violence to each other, the experiment's over. So the guards cannot put their hands on them or vice versa. And anybody attacks one another, it's automatic. The experiment over, no one gets paid. So they have to do basically, so they figure out what the way to do to get them to do it is either scare them or humiliate them into submission. That's basically the only tactics they have. And so like the scene where they refuse to eat the food, Travis refuses to eat the food, starts this downfall. Because it looks like dog food. They keep calling it dog food and stuff like that, and they have to find out a way to do something. So one thing leads to another, and that's where we kind of start seeing the ball rolling down the hill. But I think a lot of times you see that. And so, that's the biggest thing is, making people, humiliating people and to embarrass them. And of course, and I'm sure, with a bunch of, military type-minded dudes, being humiliated around other men is not probably a thing that we want to ever have happen to you, because it's hard to live that down after that happens, I think, in a lot of ways. So if you're the prisoners and you see another guy get humiliated, that guy who's being humiliated, that's tough. So at that point, is the money really worth it? And I would venture to say for some people, no, their pride's way more up there than money. And I think that's how the thing kind of falls apart, in my opinion.
Because they were all motivated by money, every single one of them.
Right. Everybody.
And I just don't see them being pushed to that extreme based on what I saw. Because they can't touch each other, because if they do, the experiment's over and no one gets paid. And unless they were complete sociopaths, that's the only feasible way I could see that coming to fruition. Because at that point, nothing matters.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, that the main catalyst for all this we haven't really brought this guy up at all, but is the Benji character. He's like a pasty, tubby graphic novelist or whatever who ends up apparently is a diabetic, and he's basically dying. And so that ratchets it up the thing because they want him to. They're gonna. The guards are not gonna let him have his insulin because they can't bring anything in from the outside world. And so that's like the catalyst for a lot of, especially the Travis character, to keep pushing and pushing and pushing because he knows this guy's getting ready to die. And so I think that's the reason why you see that again, because like your point, the stuff they're doing to them is not really that big of a deal. I mean, in the big scheme of things, but also, quite frankly, getting pissed off by 12 guys is probably not an ideal situation either. And that probably is going to, you're going to stop caring a little bit about your money. And it goes back to what we're talking about, like fighting or flight, standing up for something or not. It's like, until you're in a situation where you're being like humiliated like that, maybe you stop caring about money because you're getting pissed off by a bunch of guys. So, at some point there's a breaking point, which is what I wrote down. Everyone has a breaking point. So I think for me, it was watching that Benji character obviously start getting sick and then like on the brink of dying from not having his insulin, to the other little transgressions that you see go throughout the movie. Like that with the one guy, the governor, I liked him. I think they call him governor. That started the one that throws the basketball and hits the other guy in the face on accident. I really liked his character, because you could tell like that guy's like a real even-tempered guy. He's just kind of like this, there to pick up a paycheck, basically, like kind of laughing it off. And then of course it escalates, right? So I feel like they do enough stuff in there to kind of ratchet up a bit without it being like like you said, where it's like a violence where they can't get away with that.
And perhaps, I come from a different stock too, because there's a meme that was going around on the internet. It was, I forget what movie it was, but, it's like the military's giving me a certain set of skills. You can keep me on hold as long as you want to. I'm used to waiting.
Right.
That's not going to bother me. And, if you can't list 6 days in solitude, that's nothing. Like,
right. I was thinking the same thing. I wrote down they only made it 6 days out of 2 weeks. So they didn't make it a full week. And then it was like the breakdown of everybody, you know what I'm saying? I mean, of course, again, until you're in a situation like that, you don't really know. You don't have anything to keep your mind busy. They don't have anything there. They have no electronics, they have no TVs, no radio. It didn't look like they have any books. It looks like them just sitting in solitary confinement, basically, with one another. So, who knows how you're going to react to that, essentially, until you're put in that situation. I would think, especially nowadays, with young people now, they couldn't make it 12 hours, let alone 6 days, because they don't have some kind of electronic in their face.
Like I said, and I have a different background, so maybe my perception is skewed, because 14 days with no interaction with people, I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
If it was $1,000 a day, that's all I got to do is not talk to people or not have interaction. Fine, and maybe other people don't think like that, and like I said, maybe that's my own blinders on, but. Sure. To me, you're a weak-minded individual if you can't do that.
Right. I do got to say that there's a scene, or the character you mentioned, Clifton Collins Jr., who plays the neo-Nazi skinhead, or I guess neo-Nazi is not really a skinhead, but it's funny because in real life there was a lot of cultural appropriation going on in there, talking about cultural appropriation, because in real life he's a Mexican, he's a Mexican American,
and that's what I had. He was in Boondock Saints too. As the Mexican, and I was like, that's kind of an odd casting choice.
So I thought it was funny. I'm like, hold on, wait, what? And I mean, when I was younger, when I watched this movie 12 years ago, because I'd only seen this movie one time and I completely forgot almost everything about it. So me watching this yesterday was like watching it for the first time. And then I was like, when they show the tattoo, the cut off of the shirt for a moment, and I'm like, hold on, wait. Clifton Collins is a white supremacist. Hold on, wait, what's going on here? Like, isn't he Mexican in real life? And like every movie he's ever been in, almost he plays like that kind of character. And then when like at the end, it's almost so funny because there's a scene, and you'll know what I'm talking about in the movie where they, he knows the deal because he's done this before. He knows. So he's just like not wanting to cause trouble because he knows how it's going to go down. He's there to collect a paycheck. He knows how this is all going to be set up. But then when the Travis character finally, after there's so many things that happened, they pretty much secluded them all off and handcuffed them throughout the facility. And then when the Travis character finally gets loose, he's going through and trying to get people unchained from their handcuffs in these different parts of the building. He asked the Clifton Collins character number 71 or 17 or whatever. I think it's 71. He goes, "Hey, do you want to? He goes, you want to fight back now?" He goes, "Are you done getting along?" And he goes, "Oh hell yeah, I am." And then they unhook him, and then all of a sudden it's almost like this superhero movement, like a moment in the movie where he like takes off his shirt and unveils like all these like prison tattoos of like Nazi stuff, and it's just like it's almost like they're glorifying this guy for being like an ex prisoner who is willing to kill people and like really fight hardcore. And that's just kind of like, I don't know if that's the image they want to go with or not, but that's kind of the vibe that you get is like, oh yeah, I'm down to fight now. I'm down to do all this stuff, and we're gonna get the guy who's the white supremacist to do it. So it's like, I'm kind of like, is that where we're headed with this storyline? But it kind of was that way.
Oh, and some of my favorite dialogue from the movie was between that guy and Adrian Brody. Like the discussions they had back and forth were really what made the movie for me.
Oh, yeah, I agree. So for me, again, towards the end of the movie, there's at the end, to go back to what you were saying, the Collins character, Clifton Collins, when they're on the bus, when they're heading back into civilization or whatever, he says this line: "Do you still think?" Because they mentioned this at the beginning when they're first in the prison cell, right? "Do you still think we're higher on the evolutionary ladder than the monkeys?" He's telling that to the Travis character after everything that we just witnessed, right? And they experienced, they went through. He goes, "Yes, we still can do something about it." That was his response. And that to me is like, and I don't want to get too down a rabbit hole, but that is a mindset that we find ourselves in today. People who think, even though they just literally experienced the exact opposite. That the Travis, the Adrian Brody character was Mr. Fun Loving, tree hugging, anti-war, kind of like this, for the lack of better, liberal person, let's say. And he just experienced what exactly happens when you have people who are left to their own devices. And he himself decided to do the exact opposite of how he was, quote unquote, made in his mind and the way he was trying living his life. He was like the whole like, hey man, it's all peace and love. And then he was about ready to murder somebody if the lights that everything didn't stop, essentially the experiment didn't stop. And then that was what he said. So he doesn't even believe his own words. But at the end, he says that to be like, oh yeah, but we can still do something about it. Well, no, you just proved that you couldn't do something about it. You didn't live and let live. You did the exact opposite of that. But that's that logic that these people have is, well, that's the way it should be. I don't have to adhere to it, but everybody else should adhere to it.
I disagree.
So let's hear it.
Because they did live and let live. No one died in that. Now, if you look at monkeys in that situation, in the wild, the monkey would have killed the other monkey. Adrian Brody had the capacity to, beat the shit out of Forrest Whitaker, and he still lived. Now, the guy from Never Back Down, I don't know what his name is, but he was kind of the villain in that. That seems to be his status quo as being a villain. I don't know if he survived or not. The guy, that dude, like he raped the other guy, choked him out with the handcuffs. But they all kind of looked at each other at the end, and it shows you that there's still humanity there. Like, this was a bad situation. I fucked up, you fucked up, we all fucked up. We got to find a way forward. So, yeah, I do think that, humans have the capacity to do that, whereas monkeys would not. Because you watch the beginning of the movie and it shows these animals fighting each other, and it doesn't show the climax, but were some of those animals killed? I don't know, maybe, but they don't have the capacity to be like, come to the realization is like, this isn't right. At the end of the movie, they had that capacity to be like, you know what? I've proven my point. The red buzzer's going off. I'm done. Nature doesn't have that. We have that. Nature doesn't.
Well, it's funny you say that because, again, like, we're going to have to agree to disagree, is because the reason they stopped was because they know it was, at the end of the day, in a quote unquote experiment, and they were being recorded. So of course they don't want to actually murder somebody over an experiment. But the actual experiment itself proved itself that being left to your own devices, you actually are not the person who you think you are. If that light didn't pop on, Adrian Brody's killing the Forrest Whitaker character. So they were interrupted because of that. Just like two animals fighting, like you have two dogs fighting, if you don't interrupt it, they're going to kill each other. But if you interrupt it, they're going to stop fighting. That's the reality of it. So yeah, they were interrupted in a battle. So yeah, we could do the what if all day long. So you're taking the what if. Well, the light came on, the sirens went off, they stopped, and humanity showed that we could stop ourselves. But in a real situation, I don't think that's actually the case at all. I actually think if the siren didn't go off, the lights didn't blow off, blah blah blah, that's going to continue to de-evolve into complete anarchy and people being maimed and murdered and killed or whatnot.
But
so
the difference would come from, would a monkey have the capacity to stop that in that same situation? I disagree. It would not.
Well, that part I agree with, correct. But I'm saying that the only reason why they stopped was because they were conditioned.
But it's about stop. It's about the capacity. Do you have the capacity to stop? Humans do.
Again, I think we see lots of situations where I understand what you're saying with the species, but I'm saying to this logic is that you're saying the logic that they're going in with this is that you said, well, they have the ability to stop. Yes. What I'm saying is, would they have stopped if it wasn't for the experiment to be would end? And I would say I'm on the side of saying no, they would not have stopped.
I believe they would, because if I remember right, they did stop before everything went off. They should have stopped. They should have stopped the experiment way before that, because there was stuff that was caught on camera that I was like, why is this still going on?
Sure.
But I still firmly believe that even if the red light hadn't come on, the point was proven and they would have stopped, because it takes a lot of gall to kill somebody, especially with your own two hands, as was Adrian Brody attempting to do.
Well, it's cool that we both, it goes back to when two people watch the same crash, they come at it, they see two different things.
But you know what?
That's why
we disagree. What? But I still love you.
That's what I was getting ready to say. That's my point. It's like, exactly. Like, even though we could watch the exact same movie, obviously we saw the exact same film, but with the ending, the way we view the ending is going to be completely different. We did talk about this before, which is even makes it more authentic, because this wasn't like predetermined to have this discussion the way it goes. So I had no idea how you're going to view it. I didn't either. But yeah, man, of course. But that goes back to what I love about what we're doing here, but also it's to our society. People can disagree and still walk away from it and being like, all right, man, that's your point, that's my point. Like, no hard feelings. We don't got to get butthurt about it. You don't have to agree with me and vice versa. Like, you know, and I think that's a good thing, because at the end of the day, you know, I was entertained by the movie. I enjoyed the performances. I thought the topic was very interesting. I think it's very topical of what's kind of going on in our society right now in a lot of ways. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a movie that, again, depending on, I think also like your, I don't know the word predisposition, if that's the right word, of like where your mindset is before you watch a movie like that. You know, like where you're gonna fall anyways. Who do you identify with, right? What character do you feel more like that? And also, be honest, I think we live in a culture now where you look for these little things more than normal to see where these people are going, what direction the movie's going to take you, or what these characters are going to say, and like, do you agree with them or not? I can tell you, 12 years ago, when I watched this movie, I didn't pick up on a lot of these like more subtleties, you know. But now the world we live in, because everybody's so heightened, and all these like microaggressions that people try to bring up to your attention, and like what certain people say or certain terms or things, you're a lot more aware of it. And so, you know, I'm a little bit more like sensitive, let's say, when you hear those things, like, oh, that's what that person's trying to get across, or that's what they're trying to get across with that, you know? And so it gave it a different dynamic. Good or bad, I'm not talking about that, but it's definitely different.
No, absolutely.
So overall, what would you say this is the movie people should, I mean, you know, give it a view, give your thoughts, you know? I mean, I would assume for me, yes. And it's okay. We do a little Phoenix, little Joaquin Phoenix stuff there, dude. Yeah,
No, it
like
was
a
good.
gladiator.
It needed to be told, and it brings to light, you know, something that happened 50 years ago in that Stanford prison experiment. And that's something that's come under scrutiny because people have used that as a defense. And like I said, I'm gonna link a documentary in this video that talks about that that documentary and how it was taken out of context and was manipulated from the beginning. Because the prison guards, it's like, okay, we're taught to believe that they were sent in, and it's like, okay, here's the prisoners and here's the prison guards, go do your thing. But when you look behind the scenes and you see these interviews with the I don't know what his name is, but the head guard, the one that was hated through that whole thing, the people doing the experiment were like, you need to make them hate you. You need to be feared. And that seated in his mind is like, okay, now I'm playing a part. Now it's not reality.
Right.
Now I'm going outside myself to give you the product that you want to see.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know,
That's like every reality show since like the mid 2000s or early 2000s. It's like you think you're watching a reality show, but really there's people out to the side, like producers, telling you, "Hey, I need you to be this character. I need you to say these things to like build drama. You know, build the excitement of a show. Because if it showed 12 people sitting on an island, just having an island, like just partying time, that's not entertaining. So it's kind of like that. Like we got these guards, like you said, but if everybody just sitting around, you be the guard, I'm the prisoner, and we're all just getting along. And we're all playing cards and having a good time. Nothing happens.
one of the people in that interview was the cousin, I think it was the cousin of one of the Army Rangers that committed that bank robbery. I think it was back in the 90s. And
Oh wow.
in this guy's defense, and he was a private, and the ringleader of this was like, I don't know if it was his platoon sergeant or command sergeant major or, you know, officer in charge. He played the Stanford prison experiment excuse and was like, I thought it was a training exercise. I didn't know what was going on. And he really got off on this. Like he did a little bit of time, but it wasn't anything extraordinary like what he should have gotten. And
Sure.
after the fact, he had the gumption to be like, yo, I knew what was going on the whole time.
Well,
But
of course.
having things like this, you know, it provides that proof of doubt, that cloud. So, you know, movies like this are important. And like I said, it kind of brings up things from the past to try to help us work through the things that have kind of bit us in the ass throughout history.
Yeah.
So, Jason, I appreciate you bringing this one to my attention, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was filmed great. I thought the characters were great. I didn't necessarily agree with the script and the narrative, but I think it's still important on the same note.
Yeah, I think it's a hidden gem from the 2010, the early aughts, if you will. I think it's one of those films that it has a high caliber of acting. Like Forrest Whitaker and Adrian Brody are both Oscar winners or Oscar like nominations or something over the years. I think Forrest Whitaker actually was a winner, and Adrian Brody's been nominated multiple times. So I mean, these are like these are high level actors. So this and I think that's what brings this movie up a bit with like some of the material we talked about, some of maybe the more like ridiculous elements of some of the things that goes on in this. It has a level of gravitas or whatever with these actors doing those lines and doing these situations or being in these situations. So yeah, I think overall it's a great movie. I want to. There's another movie I think I want to see if you want to watch eventually. I think it's called Animal Farm, and it's another prison based movie. And I think it's called Animal Farm, but I'm gonna have to do some research on that. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed the talk that we did here today. Please, for myself and for Chris, leave comments below. Let us know what you think about this one. I think this is one of the few ones we've done so far that was very it has a lot of people can take away what they will. It has some very stark comments that could be made. This movie has a lot of like things it's trying to get across to the public. So if you've seen the movie, let us know what your thoughts were on it. This is not like a horror movie that's a horror movie that's for fun and giggles. This is a lot more serious a topic. So if you've seen the movie, what's your thoughts about it? We would love to hear you below in the comments. And if you have other suggestions, that's something that Chris and I don't talk about a lot. But if people who've been watching our videos, if you have a suggestion for maybe whatever it is, it could be any topic, any film, any director, any actor, something that you think that would be fun to watch, let us know. Give us some ideas at the bottom, and if we can find the movie, we'll try to give it a shot. We'll watch it and maybe even have you participate in it, even possibly. You can pop on and maybe watch it with us and give us your insights on the film. So we really appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to watch the movie or watch our video. Hopefully you all watch the movie as well. And until next time, thank you for watching.